History is often told as a serious story of kings, queens, wars and revolutions. But tucked between the dusty pages are tales so strange you might not believe they actually happened. From emperors attacked by bunnies to the day Russia drank its entire vodka supply dry, the past was often weirder than fiction. In this video, we're diving into 100 of the oddest, funniest, and most unbelievable facts from history. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like and subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know when and where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and then let it out, because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. 1. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, millions of families struggled to survive, and clothing became a luxury that many could no longer afford. Instead of purchasing new garments, people relied on whatever materials they could salvage. One of the most common resources was the sturdy fabric from flour, sugar and potato sacks. Mothers carefully washed, bleached, and cut these coarse bags into dresses, shirts, and aprons for their families. At first the clothing looked plain and rough, but wearing sackcloth became a badge of resilience rather than shame. Soon, food companies realized how popular this practice had become. To meet demand, they began printing their sacks with cheerful patterns like florals, stripes, and geometric designs. Children would go to school in sackcloth dresses that looked surprisingly stylish, and families could coordinate outfits without spending extra money. It was a creative response to hardship, and a reminder of how even in desperate times people find ways to adapt. The flour sack fashion trend remains one of the most enduring symbols of American resourcefulness during the Depression era. Napoleon Bonaparte. One of history's most famous generals was no stranger to unlikely defeats, but perhaps the strangest occurred not on the battlefield, but during what was supposed to be a pleasant rabbit hunt. Napoleon arranged the hunt for himself and his men, expecting a day of sport in the countryside. The organizers gathered hundreds of rabbits, assuming they would scatter once released. Instead, the animals charged directly at Napoleon and his men in an unstoppable furry wave. The rabbits were not wild, but tame ones who had been raised for food. They mistook the approaching soldiers for their feeders and rushed forward. Napoleon was forced to retreat, laughing and bewildered by the absurd attack. What began as sport ended in embarrassment, leaving the general bested by bunnies. It remains one of the most humorous blunders in military history. Even a conqueror of nations could be undone by a herd of hungry rabbits. Cleopatra is often remembered for her beauty, but her intellect was just as remarkable. She was the first of her dynasty to actually speak Egyptian. Her Ptolemaic ancestors clung to Greek, ruling as foreigners in Egypt. Cleopatra, however, spoke at least 9 languages, from Hebrew to Arabic. This allowed her to negotiate directly without translators. Her skill with language strengthened her power and diplomacy. It helped her win the loyalty of Egyptians, unlike her predecessors. She impressed Roman leaders with her wit and eloquence. Even her rivals admitted her intelligence was formidable. Cleopatra's linguistic talents reveal her as more than a seductress. She was a strategist who used communication as power. Her ability to speak across cultures made her one of history's sharpest rulers. Her reign blended charisma, intellect, and calculated diplomacy. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed more than 13,000 houses and left tens of thousands homeless. Yet remarkably, only a handful of people were recorded as dying. The blaze raged for 4 days, consuming much of the medieval city. It began in a bakery on Pudding Lane and spread rapidly through wooden homes. The fire was so intense that stone structures cracked from the heat. While the destruction was vast, the fire cleared away old plague-ridden neighbourhoods. It also forced London to rebuild with stronger materials like brick and stone. In the aftermath, architects such as Christopher Wren redesigned the city with wider streets and safer construction. The Great Fire became a turning point in urban planning. From disaster rose renewal, proving that cities can be reborn from ashes. London emerged stronger, safer, and more modern than before. The Leaning Tower of Pisa has leaned since the day construction began. Work started in 1173, but by the time builders reached the second story, the tower tilted. The soft, unstable soil beneath it couldn't handle the weight. For centuries, architects tried to correct the lean with each new addition. Their fixes only shifted the tilt in new directions. Despite its flaw, the tower became a marvel of engineering resilience. Tourists from across the world flocked to marvel at its angle. At its worst, the tilt reached over 5 degrees, threatening collapse. Modern engineers stabilized it in the 1990s, reducing the lean slightly. They ensured it would stand safely for at least 200 more years. What began as a construction error turned into an icon. The Leaning Tower proves that imperfection can become world-famous beauty. Iceland's parliament, the Althing, is the oldest still in existence. Founded in the year 930, it began as an open-air assembly in Thingvellir. Chieftains and free men gathered there each summer to settle disputes and make laws. It was part legal court, part political forum, and part community festival. The gathering strengthened Iceland's unique culture of law and democracy. Even after centuries of foreign rule, the Althing survived. It moved indoors in the 19th century but retained its historic name. Today it governs modern Iceland, blending tradition with contemporary politics. Few nations can claim such an unbroken thread of government. The Althing symbolises continuity and resilience in a changing world. For Icelanders, it is more than parliament. It is a cornerstone of national identity. Its story shows how ancient institutions can adapt and endure across time. Alexander the Great left his mark not only on empires, but also on maps. He named over 70 cities after himself, including Alexandria in Egypt. Some were major trade centres, others were tiny military outposts, but all carried his name as a symbol of conquest and pride. This practice ensured his memory spread across continents. The cities reflected his ambition for unity under Hellenistic culture. Many were built along rivers or coasts to control trade routes. Some still exist today, though renamed or altered by history. For locals, living in Alexander's city became part of their identity. The sheer number of namesakes highlights his ego as well as his vision. Alexander conquered lands and then carved his name into geography itself. In a sense, every map became a monument to his ambition. The Library of Alexandria is remembered as one of the greatest cultural losses in history. Founded in the 3rd century BC, it sought to collect all the world's knowledge. Ships docking in the city were searched, and their scrolls copied for the library. At its height, The library may have held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. It was a beacon of learning in the ancient world. But the library suffered multiple disasters over centuries, from fires to invasions. No one knows exactly how or when it was finally destroyed. The loss meant countless works of science, philosophy and history vanished forever. Had the library survived, our understanding of the ancient world would be far richer. The Library of Alexandria remains a symbol of both ambition and fragility. It shows how human knowledge can vanish as quickly as it's gathered. Genghis Khan was feared for his conquests, but admired for his tolerance of religion. Though he followed Tengrism, he encouraged freedom of belief in his empire. He welcomed Buddhist monks, Christian missionaries, Muslim scholars, and Taoist priests. He listened to their teachings, seeking wisdom from every tradition. This policy helped unify his vast and diverse territories. Khan understood that allowing people to worship freely reduced rebellion. It also gave him insight into different cultures and philosophies. His empire became a crossroads of faith, where religions coexisted under Mongol rule. This openness contrasted with many rulers who imposed their beliefs by force. Genghis Khan's pragmatism showed that tolerance can be a tool of power. It also made him a surprisingly progressive leader for his time. His empire thrived not only through war, but through acceptance. 10. The phrase, "saved by the bell," is often linked to people being buried alive. Stories claim bells were tied to coffins so the living could ring for help. But in reality, this saying comes from boxing. A fighter close to defeat could be spared when the round-ending bell rang. The phrase spread into everyday speech as a metaphor for last-second rescue. The coffin bell myth, though false, wasn't completely baseless. In the 18th and 19th centuries, safety coffins were invented for fearful families. Some included air tubes, flags, or bells just in case of premature burial. But the common phrase has nothing to do with these devices. Its roots remain firmly in the boxing ring. It's a good reminder of how myths distort language origins. Sometimes the real story is less spooky, but no less interesting. Roman concrete was so durable that many structures still stand after 2,000 years. Unlike modern concrete, it actually grew stronger over time. Scientists discovered the secret ingredient was volcanic ash. It allowed the concrete to heal itself when cracks formed. Seawater reacted with the ash to create new minerals that reinforced the material. This innovation gave Rome lasting harbours, aqueducts, and monuments. Modern engineers study the formula to develop greener, longer-lasting building materials. The Pantheon's dome, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome, is a marvel of this mix. Roman builders unknowingly created one of history's most sustainable technologies. Their concrete outlived the empire itself, a legacy of science hidden in stone. Rome's durability was written not only in conquest, but in chemistry. In medieval Europe, animals were sometimes put on trial. Pigs, goats, even insects could be charged with crimes. They stood in court, represented by lawyers, and judged by human magistrates. Punishments range from excommunication to execution. The practice reflected how seriously people took law and religion. One famous case saw a pig executed for killing a child. Other times, locusts were excommunicated for destroying crops. The trials seem absurd today, but they show medieval attempts to explain disorder. In a world without modern science, people extended justice to all living things. It was both superstition and an effort at fairness. Animal trials reveal the strange blend of faith and law in the Middle Ages. They are bizarre, yet deeply human attempts to impose order on chaos. During Prohibition in the United States, bootleggers found creative ways to sneak alcohol past police. One popular method was the cow shoe. Bootleggers wore shoes with wooden soles carved to look like cow hooves. This left hoof-shaped tracks in the dirt, confusing authorities tracking them. The disguise allowed smugglers to transport liquor across rural areas without suspicion. The trick highlighted both the desperation and creativity of the era. Prohibition laws fueled a booming underground economy. Gangsters grew rich while ordinary citizens found ways to drink in secret. The cow shoe is a quirky reminder of this defiance. It shows how even footwear became a tool of rebellion. In the cat-and-mouse game of Prohibition, Americans proved that determination always finds a path. The cow shoe left behind not just tracks, but a cultural footprint of resistance. Medieval doctors often diagnosed illness by examining urine. They studied its colour, smell, and even taste to detect imbalances in the body. Physicians carried urine charts showing shades linked to specific diseases. Patients might hand over jars of urine instead of describing symptoms. It was one of the most common diagnostic methods for centuries. Though misguided, the practice wasn't entirely useless. Changes in urine can signal infection or dehydration. But medieval interpretations leaned heavily on astrology and the four humours. Some doctors claimed they could diagnose pregnancy or predict death from a glance, while modern medicine laughs at the extremes. Uroscopy laid groundwork for observation. It shows humanity's early attempts to read the body's hidden signals. Even strange methods paved the path to scientific progress. The word salary comes from the Latin salariums, or meaning salt money. In ancient Rome, soldiers were sometimes paid in salt or given allowances to buy it. Salt was essential for preserving food and maintaining health. Its value made it a cornerstone of trade across the empire. Roman roads were even built to transport salt more efficiently. The importance of salt-shaped language and culture. Expressions like "worth his salt" still echo its ancient value. Salt symbolized loyalty, necessity, and survival. It was more than seasoning, it was a paycheck. Rome's reliance on salt shows how everyday resources can define civilizations. From soldier wages to modern sayings, the legacy of salt endures. A simple mineral helped fund an empire and flavoured history itself. The Sahara Desert, which today is one of the harshest and driest landscapes on Earth, was once a lush green paradise teeming with life. More than 100 million years ago, fossil evidence shows that ancient crocodiles roamed this environment, but these weren't the slow water dwellers we imagine today. Some species developed strong limbs that allowed them to gallop across land. They hunted prey with surprising speed, becoming top predators of their ecosystem. Paleontologists discovered fossils in 2009 proving these galloping crocodiles could sprint like mammals. The Sahara back then had rivers, lakes, and dense vegetation. It supported dinosaurs, massive fish, and other reptiles alongside these crocodiles. Over millions of years, climate change transformed the green landscape into desert. The fossils remind us that deserts we see now were once worlds of abundance. Nature is never static, and even the driest sand can hide a past full of life. During the Middle Ages, European elites practiced a grim form of medicine called corpse medicine. It was believed that eating parts of human bodies could cure illnesses. The highest delicacy came from Egyptian mummies, ground into powder and consumed as medicine. Wealthy patients thought it could heal headaches, internal bleeding, and even epilepsy. Other remedies used fat, blood, or crushed bones of executed criminals. This practice reflected the desperation of pre-scientific medicine. Diseases were poorly understood, and people trusted superstition over science. The trade in mummies became so lucrative that tombs in Egypt were plundered. Even respected European doctors recommended these remedies. It wasn't until the 18th century that corpse medicine fell out of favour. Today it seems gruesome, but it shows how far medical practice has come. The story reveals how medicine once blurred into superstition and ritual. The infamous Roman Emperor Caligula had a deep affection for his horse, Incitatus. So deep, in fact, that he gave the animal absurd privileges. Incitatus was housed in a marble stable, fed oats mixed with gold flakes, and adorned with a jewelled collar. The horse even had servants to attend to its every need. Caligula went so far as to declare his horse a senator. According to some accounts, he even planned to make Incitatus a consul. Whether this was satire, madness, or a political joke remains debated. Some historians think Caligula wanted to mock the Roman Senate by elevating a horse above them. Others believe he was truly eccentric. Whatever the case, Incitatus became history's most pampered horse. The story endures as a symbol of Caligula's bizarre reign. It also shows how power can be used to humiliate as much as to rule. In January 1919, Boston was struck by one of the strangest disasters in American history, the Great Molasses Flood. A massive storage tank filled with 2.5 million gallons of molasses suddenly burst. A tidal wave of sticky brown liquid, 15 feet high, rushed through city streets. It moved as fast as 35 miles per hour, toppling buildings and crushing everything in its path. Horses were drowned, homes destroyed, and 21 people killed. The disaster left the city coated in syrupy residue for weeks. Cleanup crews struggled as molasses clung to every surface. Even decades later, residents claimed they could still smell molasses on hot days. Investigations revealed that the tank had been poorly constructed and never properly tested. The Great Molasses Flood remains both a tragedy and a bizarre reminder of industrial negligence. It proves disasters don't always come from fire or war. Sometimes they come from sugar. 20. When the French Revolution turned violent, King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were executed by guillotine. But their death sparked morbid fascination. Eyewitnesses claimed people rushed forward to soak handkerchiefs in their blood. These macabre souvenirs were treasured as symbols of justice or vengeance depending on perspective. Centuries later, scientists analysed one such blood-stained relic. In 2011, a handkerchief stained with dried blood was tested and dated to 1793. Genetic analysis confirmed the blood likely belonged to Louis XVI himself. The relic offered rare biological evidence of the French king. For some, it confirmed legends long dismissed as exaggerations. The practice of collecting blood showed how revolutions blur lines between justice and ritual. The French Revolution was about liberty, but it was also about spectacle. Even execution became theatre. leaving stains of history preserved in cloth. In 1644, English statesman Oliver Cromwell banned pies. He claimed they were symbols of pagan celebration and sin. For 16 years, pie making and eating went underground. Families baked in secret, passing their pies as humble bread loaves to avoid suspicion. Pies became a quiet act of rebellion against strict Puritan rule. When the monarchy was restored in 1660, so too was pie. People once again filled kitchens with meat, fruit, and custard pies. The ban became a curious footnote in England's history of religious politics. It revealed how food isn't just nourishment, but culture and identity. By outlawing pies, Cromwell underestimated their importance to the people. Food traditions have a way of surviving, even under political pressure. The return of pie was more than dessert, it was a restoration of joy. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were fierce political rivals, yet their lives were strangely intertwined. Both served as early US presidents. Both shaped the Declaration of Independence, and both lived long after the Revolution. Incredibly, they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826. That date marked the 50th anniversary of American independence. Adams' last words were, "Jefferson lives," unaware Jefferson had already passed earlier that morning. The coincidence stunned Americans. Many saw it as divine symbolism, the two architects of freedom departing on the nation's birthday. Their joint deaths cemented their legacy as twin pillars of America's founding. Though they clashed in politics, they reconciled in later years through letters. Their story reminds us that even fierce opponents can end in respect. History sometimes writes endings more poetic than fiction ever could. Joan of Arc's life was short, but filled with astonishing feats. At only 17 years old, she convinced Charles VII of France that God had chosen her to lead armies. Despite no military training, she inspired French troops to victory against the English. At one siege, she survived a 60-foot fall from a tower, landing unhurt. But her enemies eventually captured and accused her of heresy. At 19, Joan was burned at the stake. Her trial was politically motivated, and decades later she was declared innocent. Her voices, which she claimed came from saints, guided her every step. The Church later canonized her as a saint, honoring her faith and sacrifice. Her courage showed that strength does not depend on age or status. Joan of Arc became a timeless symbol of conviction and resilience. Her story remains one of the most extraordinary in medieval history. When Krakatoa erupted in 1883, the explosion was one of the loudest sounds in recorded history. It was so powerful that it ruptured eardrums of people 40 miles away. The blast circled the globe 4 times as atmospheric shock waves. It was clearly heard more than 3,000 miles away, the equivalent of hearing New York from San Francisco. The eruption destroyed most of the island and unleashed deadly tsunamis. Tens of thousands died, and skies around the world darkened with ash. Sunsets turned vivid red for months, inspiring artists and writers. Global temperatures dropped, affecting weather patterns for years. The eruption showed how a single event could impact the entire planet. Krakatoa's roar still stands as a reminder of nature's raw power. It was destruction so vast, it echoed across both time and continents. In South Africa during the late 19th century, a railway station employed an unusual worker. a baboon named Jack. Jack assisted a disabled signalman named James Wide, who had lost his legs in an accident. The baboon learned to operate levers and switches, following Wide's instructions with precision. Passengers were astonished to see a monkey controlling trains, yet Jack never once made a mistake in his 8 years of service. Railway officials tested him before allowing him to continue. Jack passed every exam, proving his reliability. He was paid in food and given official employment status. When he died, railway workers honoured him as a colleague. His story spread as proof of animal intelligence and loyalty. Jack the Baboon remains a legend of South African railway history, a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected allies. Before he became Pope Pius II, Enea Silvio Piccolomini wrote a novel called The Tale of Two Lovers. It was an erotic romance that became one of the best-selling books of the 15th century. Written in Latin, it circulated widely across Europe. The story's popularity shocked many who later revered him as Pope, yet it revealed the human side of a man who would later preach morality. Piccolomini's life showed how ambition could change one's destiny. He went from writing sensual literature to ruling the Catholic Church. Critics sometimes mention the book as evidence of hypocrisy. Others see it as proof that even religious leaders have complex pasts. The book's existence reminds us that history's great figures were also flawed individuals. It also highlights how literature shaped Renaissance culture. Even future popes were not immune to the temptations of storytelling. Historians estimate that 97% of all human history has been lost. Written records only began around 6,000 years ago, yet modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years. That means most of our story remains hidden in unwritten ages. Artifact, oral traditions, and ruins fill in only fragments. Every ancient library burned, every oral tale forgotten, widened the gap. The lost knowledge likely contained sciences, myths, and cultures we cannot imagine. For perspective, everything we know is just the tip of a vast iceberg. This reminds us of the fragility of memory. History isn't just what was written, but also what was lost. Every discovery today, from caves to ruins, is a miracle survival of time. It humbles us to realize how much remains forever unknown. Before Julius Caesar invaded Britain in 55 BC, many Romans doubted the island even existed. Rumours painted it as a land of unimaginable riches, or a ghostly edge of the world. Some thought it was merely the tip of a hidden continent. Caesar's expeditions proved Britain was real, though not easily conquered. His invasions faced fierce resistance from local tribes. The idea that educated Romans debated Britain's existence reveals how limited maps were. To them, their distant lands were shrouded in myth. By venturing into the unknown, Caesar expanded Rome's reach and knowledge. The encounters opened channels of trade and cultural exchange. Though full conquest came later, his expeditions laid the groundwork. The story shows how discovery always begins with skepticism. Even the world's greatest empires once doubted what lay beyond their borders. During the Soviet era, leaders tried to erase the memory of Genghis Khan. His name was removed from textbooks, monuments, and public discussion. Speaking of him could be punished as a crime. The Soviets feared that his legacy of Mongol unity might inspire resistance. Pilgrimages to his birthplace in Khenti were banned, despite this censorship. the memory of Genghis Khan lived on in families. Stories were whispered in private and passed down secretly. When Mongolia regained independence, his legacy returned to public life. Statues, books, and history lessons restored him as a national hero. The attempt to erase him failed, proving how deeply culture resists control. History cannot be wiped clean by decree. The name of Genghis Khan remains carved into both land and memory. 30. The guillotine, a symbol of the French Revolution, was invented in the late 18th century. Its purpose was to create equality in execution. Before its adoption, punishments varied by social class. Nobles were often granted quicker deaths, while commoners endured torture. The guillotine promised a swift, humane end for all. Dr. Joseph Guillotin proposed it as a fair method of capital punishment. Ironically, he never designed the machine himself. Once adopted, it became the primary tool of revolutionary justice. Crowds gathered to watch executions as public spectacle. The guillotine delivered thousands of deaths, including kings and revolutionaries alike. Its history reveals how ideals of fairness can be twisted into instruments of terror. The blade fell equally, but equality in death did not mean freedom in life. Adolf Hitler, one of history's most infamous figures, had a nephew who fought against him in World War II. His name was William Patrick Hitler, later William Patrick Stewart Houston. Born in Liverpool, he was the son of Hitler's half-brother. In 1939, he emigrated to the United States, where he denounced his uncle. When the war broke out, he enlisted in the US Navy. He served as a hospital corpsman treating wounded soldiers. In combat, he was injured and awarded the Purple Heart. After the war, he became an American citizen. Unlike his uncle, William lived a quiet life in New York. His story is a strange twist of history, where one Hitler fought to defeat another. It shows how even within families, allegiances can take opposite sides. In the 19th century, Surgeon Robert Liston was renowned for his incredible speed. Known as the fastest knife in the West End, he could amputate a leg in under 3 minutes. Speed mattered, as anaesthesia was not yet in common use. Patients had to endure procedures fully conscious, but one of Liston's operations turned into a dark legend. During a demonstration, he worked so quickly that disaster struck. He amputated his patient's leg, but also sliced off the fingers of his assistant. In the chaos, a spectator died of shock. Both the patient and the assistant later died of infection. The result was a shocking 300% mortality rate for one operation. It remains the only surgery in history with that grim statistic. Speed saved lives, but in this case, it destroyed them. During the Great Depression, dance marathons became a strange form of endurance contest. Couples danced for days, sometimes weeks, hoping to win food, shelter, or prize money. Rules allowed only brief rest breaks. When one partner needed sleep, the other held them up while still moving to the music. Audiences paid to watch exhausted dancers struggle on. The contest blurred the line between sport and spectacle. They offered entertainment at a time when people were desperate for distraction. Some participants collapsed or fainted from exhaustion. For others, it was the only way to keep a roof overhead. Dance marathons reflected both hardship and resilience. They showed how far people would go when survival meant staying on their feet. The dance floor became both a stage and a battlefield of endurance. Genghis Khan left behind not just an empire, but a legacy written in DNA. Studies show that about 1 in 200 men alive today share his Y chromosome. This genetic footprint comes from his vast number of children. Historical records suggest he fathered dozens, possibly hundreds. Through conquest and polygamy, his lineage spread widely. The concentration of his genetic line is especially strong in Asia, but its reach has extended far beyond Mongolia. This phenomenon shows how the actions of one ruler can echo biologically for centuries. For millions of men today, their family tree traces back to him. It is history not written in books, but inscribed in human genes. His empire collapsed, but his bloodline remains. The conqueror of nations also became the conqueror of heredity. In the Victorian era, men with large moustaches faced an everyday challenge: drinking tea. Hot steam would dampen and curl the carefully groomed hairs. To solve this, inventors created the moustache cup. It featured a porcelain guard across the rim. The guard shielded the moustache while allowing tea to pass through. The moustache cup quickly became a fashionable item. It was a staple in gentlemen's clubs and parlours. For some men, it was considered as essential as the teacup itself. The design combined practicality with refinement. Today, surviving moustache cups are quirky antiques. They remind us that style often inspires innovation. Even something as small as a moustache shaped the objects of daily life. The year 46 BC is remembered as the year of confusion. It lasted 445 days, making it the longest year in history. Julius Caesar had reformed the Roman calendar into the Julian system. To realign dates with the seasons, he added extra leap months. The result was a year stretched by nearly 3 months. Romans found themselves living through endless festivals and political deadlines. The adjustment was necessary to fix centuries of drift in the old lunar calendar. Though chaotic, it stabilized timekeeping for generations to come. The Julian calendar was so effective that parts of it remain in use today. The year of confusion shows how even time itself is sometimes reshaped by politics. What felt like endless days then became the foundation for order in centuries after. In colonial America, enslaved people sometimes sought freedom through the courts. Though their chances were slim, lawsuits offered a path to liberty. If they won, they gained citizenship. Lacking last names, many adopted freemen to mark their status. Court victories were rare, but not impossible. These cases exposed contradictions in a society that preached liberty while practicing slavery. They also showed the courage of those willing to fight through legal means. For some, a single lawsuit determined generations of descendants' futures. Though most petitions were denied, the successes revealed cracks in the system. The pursuit of justice through courts foreshadowed the later abolition movement. It was a reminder that even in oppressive systems, individuals sought freedom wherever they could. The University of Oxford, one of the world's most prestigious schools, predates the Aztec Empire. Teaching began at Oxford around the year 1096. By contrast, the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan was founded in 1325. This means Oxford was already over 200 years old when the Aztecs began to rise. The comparison highlights differences in world timelines. While Europe developed universities, the Americas nurtured empires. Both produced remarkable advances in knowledge and culture. The fact that Oxford predates the Aztecs surprises many. It shows how history often overlaps in unexpected ways. One region's ancient past may coincide with another's medieval age. Oxford still thrives, while Tenochtitlan survives only in ruins beneath Mexico City. It is a striking reminder that civilizations flourish on different calendars of history. Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian countess, is remembered as one of history's most notorious killers. Accused of torturing and murdering hundreds of young women, she earned the nickname Blood Countess. Rumours claimed she bathed in virgin blood to preserve her youth. Though historians debate the scale of her crimes, her legend endures. She may have killed over 650 victims. Bathory's case was sensational even in her own time. Nobles whispered about her cruelty, while villagers told tales of missing girls. Eventually she was arrested and walled inside her castle as punishment. Whether exaggerated or true, her story became part of vampire folklore. She represents the dark side of aristocracy, where power shielded brutality. The myth of the blood-bathing countess still fascinates modern culture. She remains a chilling symbol of how legend can magnify horror. Fact number 40. After World War II ended, Soviet citizens celebrated with wild enthusiasm. Street parties erupted across cities, fueled by music, dancing, and vodka. So much vodka, in fact, that the nation's supply ran out. Reports claim it was gone within just 22 hours. For nearly a day, every toast drained the reserves. When bottles finally emptied, the celebration slowed. But the shortage became legendary. It showed how deeply vodka was tied to Russian culture. For many, drinking together symbolized victory as much as parades did. The empty shelves were seen not as failure, but as proof of unity. Even today, the story of the day Russia ran out of vodka is retold. It captures the intensity of joy and exhaustion at the war's end. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military award, was first issued during the Civil War. In 1862, Union soldiers from the Great Locomotive Chase became its first recipients. The raid involved stealing a Confederate train and disrupting supply lines. Though risky, the mission succeeded in drawing attention from enemy forces. Those who took part were hailed as heroes. Since then, the Medal of Honor has been awarded sparingly. Recipients display extraordinary bravery beyond the call of duty. The decoration is so rare that many recipients receive it posthumously. Its origins in the Civil War show how chaos often produces courage. The medal connects modern soldiers with a tradition stretching back 160 years. It remains a powerful symbol of sacrifice and valor in American history. In the 18th century England, pineapples were rare and expensive. They became symbols of wealth and high status. The rich carried pineapples as accessories, showing them off at parties. They decorated homes, clothing, and art with pineapple designs. Even rental services existed, lending pineapples for events. Owning a pineapple meant you had global connections and money. They were imported from the Caribbean at great cost. Guests who dined in homes with pineapples felt honoured. The fruit's fame was less about taste than image. Today pineapples are common, but they still carry meaning. They symbolise hospitality, a legacy of their elite past. What was once a rare luxury became a universal welcome sign. In ancient Greece, redheads were often feared after death. Folklore claimed they would become vampires. This belief likely arose from their pale skin and sensitivity to sunlight. To Mediterranean Greeks, their unusual appearance seemed unnatural. Stories painted them as cursed or dangerous even beyond the grave. While the superstition sounds strange today, it reflected how cultures stigmatized difference. Red hair was rare in Greece, making it a source of suspicion. In reality, redheads were simply carrying genetic variations from Northern Europe, but myths spread faster than science. The legend connects hair colour with supernatural danger. It is one of many ways humans have linked physical traits to fear. Even something as innocent as red hair became fuel for vampire lore. Romans adored pets, though their choices differed from modern ones. Instead of cats, they kept ferrets to hunt mice and rats. Dogs served as guards, companions, and hunting aids. Monkeys entertained households with their antics. Animals were woven into everyday Roman life. Roman mosaics often depicted pets, showing their importance in homes. Collars, toys, and leashes have been found in ruins. The variety of pets reflected Roman wealth and culture. While cats later became beloved across Europe, Romans preferred other species. Pets in Rome weren't just companions, they were workers and entertainers. Their presence shows that love for animals is timeless, even if species differ. Ancient families found joy in the same bonds we do today. The tablecloth, now a dining staple, once served as a communal napkin. When first introduced, guests wiped hands and faces directly on it. It wasn't just decoration, but part of dining etiquette. Hosts expected it to be used for cleanliness. Over time, napkins evolved as separate items. The tradition reflects how dining customs adapt with culture. What began as practical became symbolic. By the Renaissance, wealthy households embroidered tablecloths as status symbols. They were no longer meant to be dirtied. Napkins took over the cleaning role, leaving tablecloths as display. The shift shows how manners transform ordinary objects. Even something as simple as fabric can mirror changes in society. Roman hygiene might sound strange to us, but one of their cleaning methods involved urine. In ancient Rome, stale urine was collected in large jars and sold as a valuable commodity. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, a natural cleaning agent. It was used for whitening togas, cleaning wool, and even as mouthwash. Workers in laundries stomped on clothes soaked in urine to scrub them clean. The Roman Emperor Vespasian even placed a tax on urine collection, known as the urine tax. This practical, if unpleasant industry made waste profitable. The phrase, "money does not stink," is believed to have come from Vespasian's justification of the tax. It shows how even the most unlikely substances found use in Roman society. Though odd today, it was simply one more sign of Roman ingenuity. They wasted nothing, even what others would discard. Pope Gregory IX had a deep distrust of cats, and in 1233 he declared them to be associated with devil worship. This papal bull encouraged the extermination of cats across Europe. The disappearance of cats, however, had disastrous consequences. With fewer cats around, the rat population grew rapidly. Rats carried fleas that transmitted the bubonic plague. By the 14th century, the Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions. Some historians suggest that Gregory's war on cats indirectly worsened the spread of the plague. The superstition surrounding cats turned a natural ally against disease into a scapegoat. Ironically, the very animals that could have reduced the plague's spread were hunted instead. This tale shows how fear and misunderstanding can have deadly ripple effects. Superstition often came at a steep price in medieval Europe. Grigory Rasputin, the mystic who became close to Russia's royal family, gained a reputation for being nearly impossible to kill. His influence over Tsar Nicholas II and his wife angered nobles who plotted his assassination. According to legend, they poisoned him with cakes and wine laced with cyanide. When that failed, they shot him several times, but Rasputin still clung to life. Panicked, his assassins stabbed him repeatedly, yet he survived long enough to fight back. Finally, they bound him and threw him into the icy Neva River. Only then did he die, supposedly by drowning. Historians debate which parts of the story are true and which were exaggerated. But Rasputin's death cemented his myth as the mad monk who defied mortality. Even in death, he became larger than life. From the 1940s through the 1970s, Ivy League schools such as Yale, Harvard, Brown, and Vassar conducted a bizarre study on their freshmen. New students were required to pose nude for photographs. The purpose was to gather information about posture, health, and bone development. In some cases, researchers even attached pins to students' backs. The photos included thousands of prominent future leaders. Politicians, actors, and business figures all passed through this strange ritual. Among them were George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton, and Meryl Streep. For decades, the archives were quietly stored away. When word leaked, the program was criticized as unethical and voyeuristic. Eventually, the photos were destroyed. This strange chapter in elite education shows how questionable practices can hide behind science. Even prestigious universities had skeletons in their closets. 50. The Luftwaffe, Nazi Germany's air force, had an interrogator unlike any other. Hans Scharf became famous for his unusual methods of questioning prisoners. Instead of threats or torture, he treated captives with kindness. He offered them nature walks, home-cooked meals, and casual conversations. Sometimes he even shared tea or beer with them. This approach earned trust and loosened tongues. Prisoners often revealed valuable information without realizing it. Scharf's success was so remarkable that his techniques influenced post-war interrogation practices in the United States. His story proves that empathy and psychology can be more effective than cruelty. It stands as an ironic twist in wartime history. A master of interrogation won battles not with pain, but with politeness. His lessons in persuasion live on long after the war. In parts of ancient Asia, elephants were trained to serve as executioners. They were used to crush the condemned underfoot or to tear them apart. In some kingdoms, elephants were fitted with sharp blades on their tusks. These executions were public events meant to instill fear. The sight of a massive elephant carrying out punishment left lasting terror. Rulers used the practice both for justice and spectacle. It demonstrated the ruler's control over nature as well as people. The condemned faced not only death, but humiliation by an animal. Though horrifying to modern minds, it was accepted as law for centuries. The executions ended only when colonial powers outlawed them in the 19th century. It remains one of the most chilling examples of animals used as instruments of power. When forks first appeared in medieval Europe, they were met with suspicion. Many religious leaders condemned them as unholy. The fork with its prongs, looked too much like devil's horns. Critics argued that humans already had God's given tools, their hands. Using artificial hands for eating was seen as sinful arrogance. For centuries, many refused to use them, clinging instead to spoons and fingers. But gradually, forks spread through Italy and beyond. By the Renaissance, they became fashionable among the wealthy. Eventually, practicality won out over superstition. Today, forks are so normal we barely think about them. But their story shows how even simple utensils were once controversial. Cultural change often starts with resistance before becoming everyday habit. The nursery rhyme about Mary and her little lamb is based on a real girl. Mary Sawyer was an 11-year-old from Boston who had a pet lamb. One day, the lamb followed her to school, causing chaos in the classroom. Her classmates laughed while the teacher tried to restore order. This charming incident inspired the famous rhyme. Years later, Mary used wool from her lamb to help raise money for a local church. The story spread and became part of American folklore. While the poem was later popularized by writer Sarah Josepha Hale, the original inspiration was Mary's real pet. Her story shows how everyday childhood moments can turn into timeless tales. The rhyme may be simple, but behind it is a little girl and a mischievous lamb. Their bond gave birth to one of history's most beloved verses. In the 16th and 17th centuries, wealthy Europeans believed in mummy medicine. They ground up ancient Egyptian mummies into powder. This powder was sold as a cure for headaches, stomach problems, and other ailments. The belief was that the preserved flesh carried special healing powers. Doctors prescribed it and apothecaries sold it across Europe. The practice fueled a booming trade in looted tombs. Egypt's heritage was literally consumed as medicine. Even kings and nobles took mummy powder as treatment. It wasn't until science advanced that the practice was abandoned. Today, it is seen as both grotesque and wasteful, but at the time, it was considered cutting-edge medicine. The story highlights how desperation and superstition shaped early healthcare. Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime Prime Minister, was rarely seen without a cigar. He smoked 8 to 10 a day, sometimes more than a dozen. His love of cigars became part of his iconic image. During Prohibition in the United States, he found clever ways to keep drinking legally. He carried a doctor's note prescribing him indefinite amounts of alcohol. Churchill believed alcohol helped him work long hours. He often mixed brandy or whiskey with soda during meals. His tolerance became legendary among his colleagues. For him, cigars and liquor were not just habits, but part of his persona. They symbolized his resilience and confidence in the face of war. Churchill's indulgence may have been unhealthy, but it helped shape his larger-than-life legacy. He remains as famous for his cigars as for his speeches. 100 million years ago, the Sahara Desert looked nothing like the barren dunes of today. It was a thriving landscape filled with rivers, forests, and predators. Among them were land-dwelling crocodiles that could gallop across the ground. Fossils show these creatures had long legs and powerful jaws. They chased prey like antelope and dinosaurs with terrifying speed. In 2009, paleontologists uncovered the remains of these so-called boar crocs. They revealed a predator capable of running down its victims on land. The Sahara then was a lush world teeming with life. Over time, shifts in climate transformed it into the desert we know. The fossils remind us that landscapes change dramatically across history. What is lifeless sand today was once a hunting ground for galloping crocodiles. Before modern dentures, false teeth were made from a grim source, the mouths of dead soldiers. After battles like Waterloo, dentists scavenged the field for intact teeth. They cleaned, sorted, and set them into dentures for wealthy clients. Waterloo teeth became a macabre trend among Europe's elite. It was considered the best material for realistic replacements. The trade in battlefield teeth was lucrative. Demand was high among those who could afford the grisly product. Eventually, porcelain and other materials replaced the practice. But for decades, many smiles across Europe were built on soldiers' remains. The story is a stark reminder of how war left marks beyond the battlefield. Even in death, soldiers served the living in ways they never intended. Roman Emperor Caligula's love for his horse, Incitatus, became infamous. He lavished the animal with luxuries reserved for humans. Incitatus had a marble stable, an ivory manger, and attendants of his own. He was adorned with fine jewellery and fed extravagant meals. Caligula even tried to appoint him consul. Historians debate whether this was madness or satire. Some say Caligula mocked the Senate by elevating a horse above them. Others argue it showed his instability. Whatever the truth, the story has endured for centuries. It reveals the bizarre extremes of absolute power. Even an emperor's whims could turn into political theatre. Incitatus remains the most famous horse in Roman history. On January 15th, 1919, Boston faced a disaster unlike any other, the Great Molasses Flood. A huge storage tank burst, releasing 2.5 million gallons of thick molasses. The wave rushed through the streets at 35 miles per hour. It reached 15 feet high, smashing buildings and drowning people and horses. 21 people were killed and over 150 injured. Rescue workers struggled through the sticky mess. The streets remained coated in syrup for weeks. Even years later, residents claimed the smell lingered. Investigations found the tank had been poorly built and never tested. The flood became a symbol of industrial negligence. It showed that even sweet substances could cause deadly disasters. Boston never forgot the day its streets turned to rivers of molasses. When Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed, their blood became a bizarre souvenir. Spectators dipped handkerchiefs in it to keep as relics. Some viewed the blood as proof of justice, others as tokens of vengeance. Centuries later, scientists analysed one such blood-soaked cloth. The results were extraordinary. The handkerchief dated to 1793, the year of Louis's execution. DNA testing confirmed the blood was consistent with his lineage. This relic provided rare biological evidence of the king. It showed how revolutions blur the line between history and ritual. Even in death, monarchs remained symbols of power and memory. The story demonstrates how people cling to the tangible remains of great events. A revolution's fury was literally soaked into cloth. In 1644, English statesman Oliver Cromwell banned the eating of pie. He declared it a pagan indulgence that distracted people from religious discipline. For 16 years, pie baking and eating went underground. Families disguised their pies as plain loaves of bread to avoid punishment. What had once been a common dish became a rebellious act. When the monarchy was restored in 1660, pie returned triumphantly. households celebrated by filling kitchens with meat, fruit and custard pies. The ban became a curious episode in the battle between Puritanism and tradition. It proved that food is not just fuel, but culture. Cromwell underestimated the power of shared meals. When pie came back, it symbolised more than dessert. It marked the return of joy to English tables. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, America's second and third presidents, shared an extraordinary final chapter. On July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, both men died within hours of each other. Adams' last words were, "Jefferson lives," unaware that Jefferson had already passed earlier that same day. The coincidence stunned the young nation. Many saw it as divine providence. Though once bitter political rivals, the two reconciled late in life through letters. Their correspondence became a record of reflection on democracy and friendship. Their deaths on the same day sealed their legacy as twin founders of liberty. It gave the nation a poetic moment to commemorate its first half-century. History rarely writes endings this perfect. For Adams and Jefferson, their final act was one of unity. Joan of Arc's rise to fame was nothing short of miraculous. At just 17 years old, she convinced Charles VII of France that divine voices guided her to lead his armies. Without training, she inspired soldiers and lifted the siege of Orléans. Her victories turned the tide of the 100 Years' War, but her triumphs made her a target. Captured by the English, Joan was tried for heresy. She survived a 60-foot leap from a tower in an attempt to escape. At only 19 years old, she was burned at the stake. Decades later, her conviction was overturned. Centuries later, she was canonized as a saint. Her short life became a story of faith, courage, and sacrifice. Joan remains one of the most enduring symbols of conviction in history. When Krakatoa erupted in 1883, the blast was one of the loudest sounds in recorded history. The explosion ruptured eardrums of people 40 miles away. Its shockwaves travelled around the globe 4 times. This sound was heard over 3,000 miles away, as far as Australia and India. It was destruction on a planetary scale. The eruption destroyed most of the island and triggered deadly tsunamis. Tens of thousands of people perished in the disaster. Ash filled the atmosphere, darkening skies across the world. Sunsets turned vivid red for months, inspiring artists and poets. The eruption even lowered global temperatures for years. Krakatoa's voice was not just loud, it was world-changing. It echoed across time as a reminder of Earth's power. In South Africa, a baboon once worked for the railway. His name was Jack, and he assisted James Wide, a disabled signalman who had lost both legs. Jack learned to pull levers and switch tracks on command. Amazingly, he never once made a mistake in 8 years of service. Passengers marvelled at the sight of a baboon running trains. Officials tested him before approving his employment. Jack passed every test with flawless precision. He was officially hired and paid in food and beer. When he died, workers honoured him as a colleague. His story shows the intelligence of animals and the trust between man and beast. Jack's legacy lives on as one of history's strangest railway employees. A baboon proved himself every bit as capable as men. Before becoming Pope Pius II, Enea Silvio Piccolomini wrote a novel unlike any you'd expect from a future pope. It was called The Tale of Two Lovers, an erotic romance. Published in the 15th century, it became one of Europe's best sellers. The book shocked later generations who revered him as a moral authority. It revealed a very different side of his youth. Piccolomini later renounced worldly pursuits and rose through the church hierarchy. By 1458, he was pope, leading Christendom with spiritual authority. The fact that he once wrote steamy fiction amused critics for centuries. It showed that even the most pious leaders often had colourful pasts. His story reflects how ambition, talent, and reinvention shaped the Renaissance. A pope who once wrote of passion became a symbol of faith. History is never without irony. Historians estimate that 97% of human history is lost to time. Written records began only about 6,000 years ago. Yet modern humans have existed for at least 200,000 years. That leaves most of our story unrecorded. We know only fragments through archaeology and oral traditions. Burned libraries, eroded monuments, and forgotten myths erased countless knowledge. For every tale we tell, hundreds vanished without a trace. What we know of the past is just the tip of an iceberg. The rest lies buried or forever forgotten. It reminds us of how fragile memory is. History is not only about what survives, but also about what was lost. The gaps are as important as the stories we still hold. Before Julius Caesar's invasions in 55 and 54 BC, many Romans doubted that Britain even existed. Some believed it was a myth at the edge of the known world. Others thought it was part of a giant northern continent. Rumours described it as a land of strange riches and people. Caesar's expeditions proved Britain was real, though unconquered at first. His campaigns opened trade and cultural exchange between Rome and the island. Though Rome would not fully conquer Britain until nearly a century later, Caesar's ventures laid the foundation. The skepticism of Romans reveals how much mystery surrounded geography. To them, the map still held blank spaces filled by imagination. Britain went from rumour to reality through Caesar's daring. The story reminds us how discovery begins with doubt. Even great empires were once unsure of the world's shape. During the Soviet era, authorities tried to erase Genghis Khan from memory. His name was removed from textbooks, monuments, and public ceremonies. Pilgrimages to his birthplace in Khenti were banned. Even mentioning him could be considered a crime. The Soviets feared his legacy of unity might inspire resistance. Yet the memory of Genghis survived in families and oral tradition. Stories were whispered and passed down in secret. When Mongolia regained independence, his legacy was revived. Statues were built, textbooks rewritten, and his image reclaimed as national pride. The attempt to erase him failed utterly. History proves that culture cannot be silenced forever. The name of Genghis Khan remains carved in both land and memory. 70. The guillotine, infamous during the French Revolution, was designed in the name of equality. Before its invention, nobles received quick deaths while commoners faced gruesome tortures. Dr. Joseph Guillotin proposed a machine that would kill swiftly and painlessly for all. Ironically, he never built it himself. But once adopted, it became the symbol of revolutionary justice. Crowds flocked to executions as though they were theatre. Thousands were beheaded, including Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. What began as a call for fairness became an instrument of fear. The guillotine shows how ideals can twist into terror. It was meant to erase inequality, yet it became a tool of mass death. Its blade fell without discrimination, but freedom was not won in its shadow. The guillotine remains history's most chilling equalizer. Few know that Adolf Hitler played a role in designing the Volkswagen Beetle. In the 1930s, he pushed for a people's car that every German could afford. He enlisted engineer Ferdinand Porsche to create it. The result was the iconic Beetle, cheap, efficient, and practical. It became one of the best-selling cars of all time. Hitler's involvement was part of his propaganda to present himself as a modernizer. The car was meant to symbolize progress under Nazi rule. After the war, the Beetle shed its political origins and thrived worldwide. It became a beloved symbol of peace and counterculture in the 1960s. The Beetle's story is a reminder that even ordinary objects can have dark origins. What began as propaganda turned into one of the most recognizable cars in history. In ancient Egypt, pillows were made not of feathers, but of stone. A carved block with a curved top supported the sleeper's head. This wasn't just for comfort, but for spiritual reasons. The head was considered the seat of life and had to be protected. Stone ensured it stayed elevated and safe during sleep. The design also kept insects from crawling into a person's ears or nose at night. While it sounds uncomfortable to us, Egyptians believed it preserved health and spirit. Wealthier Egyptians decorated their headrests with carvings of gods for protection. The stone pillow reveals how practical needs blended with spiritual beliefs. It was both furniture and amulet. For Egyptians, even rest carried sacred meaning. Their beds held not just sleep, but symbols of eternity. The oldest known artworks date back nearly 100,000 years. They were created by early Homo sapiens during the Upper Paleolithic era. Cave walls in modern-day France and South Africa preserve these creations. The paintings include handprints, animals, and abstract patterns. They represent humanity's first attempts to record the world. Art was not merely decoration, but communication and ritual. It connected people to nature and to each other. The use of colour and pattern reveals surprising sophistication. These early artists expressed identity, belief, and creativity. Every line in red ochre or charcoal carried meaning. The discovery of this ancient art connects us to ancestors across tens of thousands of years. It shows that imagination has always been a part of being human. During World War II, hamburgers were temporarily renamed in the United States. Because hamburger sounded too German, the dish was given a patriotic rebrand. They were called Liberty Steaks. Similarly, sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage. The changes were meant to stir unity and avoid German associations. Despite the new names, Americans knew what they were eating. The foods remained popular during wartime rationing. After the war, the original names returned. But the brief era of Liberty food reflected the power of language in shaping loyalty. It was a reminder that words can carry as much weight as weapons. Even everyday meals became part of the cultural battlefront. The hamburger's temporary new name is now a quirky footnote in wartime history. The Dutch Silly War is often called history's longest bloodless conflict. It began in 1651 when the Dutch declared war on the Isles of Scilly during the English Civil War. The Royalists had attacked Dutch ships, prompting retaliation. But after declaring war, the Dutch quickly sailed home, forgetting to make peace. For centuries, the conflict lingered only on paper. No battles were fought, no lives lost, and no one remembered it. In 1986, officials finally signed a peace treaty, ending the 335-year war. It remains a humorous example of bureaucratic oversight. The war lasted longer than many empires, yet caused no casualties. It shows how human error can stretch into centuries. The Dutch Silly War was less a war than a historical joke, but it still holds the record for longevity. Ancient Egyptians believed onions had magical properties. They placed onions in tombs as symbols of eternity. The circular layers represented endless life. Mummies have been found with onions in their eye sockets. Priests used them in rituals to ward off evil. Onions were so valued that they were sometimes used as currency. Workers on the pyramids may have been partly paid in onions. The pungent smell was thought to give strength and vitality. To Egyptians, onions were not just food, but sacred objects. Their presence in tombs shows how everyday plants took on cosmic meaning. Even a humble onion could connect the living with the afterlife. It was a bridge between nourishment and immortality. In the early 20th century, radium was considered a miracle substance. It glowed in the dark and was believed to boost health. Companies added it to toothpaste, cosmetics, and even drinking water. The radium girls were factory workers who painted watch dials with radium paint. They were told to lick their brushes for precision. Unaware of the danger, they ingested lethal doses over time. Many suffered from radiation poisoning, losing teeth and bones. Their lawsuits became pivotal in improving labour rights and safety standards. The tragedy revealed the dangers of untested scientific fads. Radium went from miracle to menace in a single generation. The glowing promise of progress turned into a deadly lesson. It remains one of the darkest cautionary tales of industrial history. In the 1800s, doctors sometimes prescribed chocolate as medicine. It was believed to aid digestion, calm nerves, and even cure tuberculosis. Pharmacists mixed cocoa with bitter herbs and sold it in apothecaries. Patients were delighted to take their medicine. Chocolate became both treatment and indulgence. Some medical journals praised its supposed healing properties. Others warned against overindulgence. Eventually, science revealed chocolate's limited health benefits, but it retained its reputation as a comfort food. Today, studies suggest dark chocolate can support heart health. What was once quack medicine is now a legitimate, if modest, dietary aid. The story shows how sweetness and science often intersect in surprising ways. The city of Venice once employed official glass eaters. These performers demonstrated the purity of Murano glass by biting and chewing it in public. Crowds gasped as they swallowed shards to prove it was free of toxins. In reality, many tricks were involved. The glass was specially prepared to be less harmful. Still, some suffered injuries or poisoning from the practice. The performances boosted Venice's glass industry, famed worldwide for quality. Glass eaters became both salesmen and spectacles. Their work blurred the line between advertising and entertainment. Venice protected its glass-making secrets fiercely. The glass eaters were part of that larger aura of mystery. They risked their lives to sell one of the city's most treasured exports. 80. Medieval knights often faced practical issues under their heavy armour. One problem was thirst during long battles or marches. To solve this, some armour was designed with built-in straws or spouts. Knights could drink water or wine without removing helmets. The innovation was simple but life-saving. hydration mattered as much as swords and shields. Fainting from heat or exhaustion could be fatal in combat. Armourers crafted clever solutions that balanced safety with survival. Though rarely depicted in films, drinking systems were part of real armour. It shows that medieval warfare was as much about logistics as fighting. Even knights needed a sip of water between swings of a sword. The detail humanises warriors often seen as only heroic figures. During the Cold War, the CIA explored using cats as spies. The program, called Acoustic Kitty, aimed to implant microphones in cats and train them to eavesdrop. One cat was released near the Soviet embassy in Washington. Unfortunately, it was quickly hit by a taxi and killed. The mission ended in failure. The project cost millions of dollars but produced no useful intelligence. It revealed the extremes of Cold War paranoia. Instead of James Bond gadgets, the CIA ended up with tragicomic experiments. Declassified documents later confirmed the bizarre plan. Though absurd, it reflected real desperation to gain an edge in espionage. Acoustic Kitty became a symbol of wasted ingenuity. Sometimes reality is stranger and sadder than fiction. The shortest war in history took place in 1896 between Britain and Zanzibar. It lasted just 38 minutes. The conflict began after the Sultan of Zanzibar refused to step down. British ships bombarded the palace. Overwhelming defences. Over 500 Zanzibaris were killed, while only one British sailor was injured. The war's brevity highlighted Britain's overwhelming naval power. It also exposed the fragility of small kingdoms against empires. The entire conflict was shorter than many modern sporting events. It remains a reminder of how fast wars can begin and end. Though brief, the war reshaped Zanzibar's political future. It became one of history's most lopsided battles. The shortest war left a long legacy in colonial history. Benjamin Franklin once proposed using the turkey, not the bald eagle, as America's national bird. He admired the turkey's intelligence and resourcefulness. By contrast, he considered the eagle a bird of bad moral character. The eagle often stole food from smaller birds. Franklin thought the turkey better represented American values. Ultimately, the bald eagle won out as the national symbol. Its strength and majesty made it more appealing to the public. Still, Franklin's letter defending the turkey became famous. It shows how national identity can hinge on symbolism. Imagine coins, flags, and seals decorated with turkeys instead of eagles. History could have looked very different with the gobbling emblem. Franklin's quirky opinion remains a beloved anecdote in American history. In medieval Europe, animal trials were surprisingly common. Pigs, dogs, goats, and even insects were put on trial for crimes. They were assigned lawyers, heard by judges, and sometimes executed. Charges range from theft to murder. The trials treated animals as moral agents. In one famous case, a pig was executed for killing a child. Other times, insects were excommunicated for damaging crops. The practice reflected a worldview where humans and animals shared the same legal order. It seems absurd today, but it reveals the deep entanglement of law, religion, and superstition. Animal trials remind us how justice has changed across centuries. What once was serious courtroom procedure now feels like dark comedy. The animals stood accused, but the real trial was of human belief. Before alarm clocks, People relied on knocker-uppers to wake them. In industrial England, workers hired these human alarm clocks. They used long sticks to tap on bedroom windows. Some even used pea shooters to hit glass panes. The job was crucial in an age of strict factory schedules. Knocker-uppers served entire neighbourhoods. They memorised clients' shifts and routes. Payment was small but reliable. The practice lasted into the 20th century before mechanical alarms replaced it. It shows how communities created low-tech solutions to everyday needs. The knocker-upper was both timekeeper and guardian of punctuality. They vanished with machines, but their story lingers as a quaint piece of working-class history. In 1518, the city of Strasbourg was struck by a dancing plague. Hundreds of people began dancing uncontrollably in the streets. They danced for days, some collapsing from exhaustion. Dozens reportedly died from strokes or heart attacks. The cause remains a mystery. Some historians suggest mass hysteria triggered by stress and famine. Others believe it was poisoning from ergot, a fungus on rye bread. The event baffled authorities who even hired musicians, hoping organised dancing would cure it. Instead, it only encouraged the frenzy. The plague eventually faded on its own. The strange outbreak shows how mind, body and society can collide. It remains one of the oddest medical mysteries of the Middle Ages. Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt, lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than to the construction of the Great Pyramid. She ruled in the 1st century BC. The pyramids were built around 2500 BC. That's a gap of over 2,000 years. The iPhone was released just 2,000 years after Cleopatra's reign. The comparison shows how vast history really is. What feels ancient to us spanned many lifetimes for those who lived it. Cleopatra walked streets that were already lined with ruins from distant ancestors. Her Egypt was a world both modern and ancient at once. Thinking of her as closer to us than to pyramid builders reframes time itself. History is longer than memory, and connections can surprise us. In the 19th century, phrenology became a popular pseudoscience. Practitioners claimed they could read personality from the bumps on a person's skull. Charts mapped traits like benevolence or combativeness to specific regions. People paid for phrenological readings as entertainment and guidance. Even employers used it to evaluate workers. Though widely debunked, phrenology influenced early psychology and criminology. It also reinforced stereotypes and justified prejudice. Today, phrenology skulls are quirky antiques, reminders of misguided science. The fad shows how curiosity can blur with pseudoscience. It also warns us that science always needs skepticism. Phrenology's rise and fall demonstrate the dangers of confusing theory with truth. It remains a cautionary tale from the age of exploration into the mind. During World War II, Britain encouraged citizens to grow food at home. The Dig for Victory campaign turned backyards, parks, and even palace gardens into vegetable plots. People grew carrots, potatoes, and cabbages to combat shortages. Children learned to garden as part of the war effort. Posters urged families to be self-sufficient. The campaign transformed the landscape of Britain. Ornamental gardens gave way to rows of vegetables. Even Winston Churchill praised the effort. The movement showed resilience and creativity under pressure. It provided not only food, but morale. Victory gardens turned ordinary citizens into frontline contributors. The humble carrot patch became a weapon of survival. 90. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed much of the city, but it also ended the bubonic plague outbreak. The fire raged for 4 days, consuming thousands of homes. It incinerated flea-infested areas where plague thrived. By wiping out rats and their carriers, the fire halted the epidemic. What was tragedy also became relief. London rebuilt with wider streets and stronger materials. The fire reshaped the city's future in both safety and design. It marked the end of medieval London and the beginning of a new era. Though devastating, it gave the city a chance to start fresh. The Great Fire shows how catastrophe can sometimes spark renewal. From ashes, London rose cleaner and stronger. It was reborn by destruction. The 7.62mm rifle cartridge, famous for its use in the AK-47, dates back to 1891. It was originally designed for the Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle of the Russian Empire. This single round of ammunition has spanned centuries of conflict, from World War I to modern battlefields. It continues to be fired. Its durability and effectiveness helped cement its reputation worldwide. Unlike many rounds that fade with technology, the 7.62 endured. Its design balanced power range and reliability. It became the backbone of Soviet and later Russian weaponry. Even today, it remains one of the most widely used cartridges. The bullet that began in Imperial Russia still echoes in the present. Few inventions have shaped warfare for so long with so little change. It is a weapon of history as much as of war. William Shakespeare is credited with the first written "Yo Mama" joke. In Titus Andronicus, a character taunts another with the line, "I have done thy mother." The insult was sharp, crude, and familiar even centuries ago. It proves that playful banter and rude jokes are timeless. People in Elizabethan England laughed at the same kind of humour. Shakespeare's plays are often praised for their poetry and depth, yet hidden among tragedies and sonnets are jokes as raw as modern stand-up. The Yo Mama jab reminds us that comedy hasn't changed much. Human nature loves wit, wordplay, and insults. Even in the 1500s, audiences laughed at humour we still recognise. It is one more reason Shakespeare endures, both lofty and lowbrow. His genius was knowing that laughter never goes out of style. Hollywood didn't begin in California. Its first films were shot in New York and New Jersey, but Thomas Edison held strict patents on camera and projector technology. Independent filmmakers fled west to escape his lawsuits. Los Angeles became their safe haven. California offered more than legal distance. It had sunshine year-round, mountains, deserts, and ocean all nearby. These landscapes allowed a wide variety of settings on a budget. Soon, Hollywood blossomed into the global centre of film. The move was born from necessity, but it built an empire. By dodging Edison's lawyers, filmmakers accidentally created a new industry. The irony is that Hollywood's freedom was founded on avoiding control. It was rebellion that turned into art and commerce. Charles Darwin invented the modern office chair. Tired of moving around his study, he attached wheels to his armchair. This allowed him to roll between desks and tables with ease. It was a simple solution that boosted productivity. Darwin's chair was the ancestor of every office swivel chair today. The invention shows Darwin's practicality as well as his curiosity. He applied problem-solving not only to science but to daily life. The humble rolling chair was as innovative in its way as his theories. It demonstrated how convenience fuels invention. From natural selection to natural comfort, Darwin sought efficiency. His chair still rolls on in every workplace in the world. A scientist, thinker, and accidental designer, he left many legacies. The Circus Maximus in Rome remains the largest sports arena ever built. Constructed for chariot races, it could hold between 150,000 and 250,000 people. Crowds roared as horses thundered around the track. It was the heartbeat of Roman public life for centuries. The scale dwarfs even today's stadiums. Beyond races, the arena hosted triumphal parades and executions. It symbolized Rome's power and its appetite for spectacle. The sheer size reveals how entertainment shaped the empire. For Romans, leisure was political as well as personal. This Circus Maximus was both theatre and tool of control. Bread and circuses kept the masses content. Its ruins remind us of a city that built monuments to pleasure and power. Ancient Sparta was so wealthy that its citizens didn't need to work. Their wealth came from conquest and the labour of the helots, an enslaved population. When a boy became a man, the state granted him farmland. Helots worked the land, providing food and resources. This system allowed Spartans to train as warriors full-time. The leisure was deceptive, built on oppression and violence. Helots often revolted, and Spartans lived in fear of rebellion. Still, the Spartan elite enjoyed lives without labour. Their society was built around military duty rather than farming. The arrangement created one of the most disciplined armies in history. Yet it also revealed fragility, a society resting on enslaved shoulders. Sparta's legend of strength hides the darker truth of dependence. Egyptian pharaohs once used slaves as flycatchers. The servants were smeared with honey to lure insects. Flies swarmed to the sticky coating, leaving the ruler unbothered. The bizarre practice highlights the extravagance of court life. Even comfort was bought at another's expense. The image of honey-covered slaves is striking. It shows the lengths elites went to preserve luxury. To modernize, it is both cruel and absurd. Yet it reveals a truth about ancient power. Rulers expected even nature to be bent for their pleasure. The buzzing of flies became someone else's burden. It was a sweet solution for one and misery for another. During Roman triumphs, soldiers sang mocking songs about their commanders. The victory parades celebrated generals who expanded Rome's territory. But the chants often joked about their flaws or scandals. Crowds laughed while heroes blushed. It was irreverence woven into ceremony. The songs kept generals humble in moments of glory. They reminded leaders that success was never immune from ridicule. The tradition mixed comedy with politics. It also revealed Rome's comfort with satire in public life. Soldiers who risked everything felt free to poke fun at leaders. The chants were both playful and powerful. They show that humour has long been a tool of balance in society. Even emperors could not silence the jest of their armies. George Washington never had wooden teeth. Instead, his dentures were made from ivory, gold, lead, and human teeth. Some came from animals, others possibly from enslaved people. The myth of wooden teeth grew from the stained appearance of his dentures. They looked rough and brown, leading to the false legend. Washington's dental struggles shaped his life. He lost most of his natural teeth by middle age. His dentures caused constant discomfort and affected his appearance. They even changed how he spoke. Though false teeth were common, his set was unusually elaborate. The story of wooden teeth endures because it seems so quaint. In truth, his mouth reflected wealth, pain, and inequality. It was history hidden in a smile. 100. The phrase, "saved by the bell," does not come from coffins. Victorians did attach bells to graves for fear of being buried alive, but the phrase actually originates in boxing. A fighter on the verge of defeat could be rescued when the round ended. The bell saved him from immediate loss. The mix-up shows how folklore can overtake fact. People liked the macabre story of grave bells more than the sport's origin. It made for better ghost tales, but linguists traced the phrase back to prize fighting. The true meaning was about timing, not death. It's one of many sayings with darker myths than reality. The bell still saves fighters, not corpses. Language proves as tricky as history itself.